Here we are with another episode of Something You Can Do. I'm your host, KJ Kozak, here with a podcast offering bite sized, action oriented items that you can do to try and make life a little more interesting. Let's get into it. I've been in a number of situations recently, ranging from professional dinners to social hangs, where I went the whole time without anybody asking me about myself. And I walk away from these situations feeling kind of deflated and like nobody wanted to get to know me. And these relationships don't really go anywhere or they stay really surface level. And I don't think it's necessarily because people don't care about me, but rather that the situation wasn't used in a way to build a deep connection. And that's in contrast to some other situations I've been in where people took the time to ask me about myself. And it's not like those that have turned into friendships or whatever, it's not like everybody needs to be your friend. But it feels very different when it feels like someone actually cares about who you are as a person versus just kind of being there in the moment. And that brings me to this thing you can do, which is ask someone about themselves. I think a lot of folks right now are feeling a loneliness epidemic or lamenting a bygone time where we all just hung around with our neighbors. And, I'm thinking about that a lot because I've been watching Desperate Housewives. No spoilers, because I didn't watch it the first time around because I was a child. And one of the big things on the show is that, the housewives are all hanging out with each other all the time. They have a weekly poker game. They're always sitting on each other's porches or noticing each other when they're unloading their groceries. There's a lot of that connection. And it makes me think of this quote that I'm about to completely butcher and misremember, but it's something along the lines of people want socialism, but they won't do the dishes, right? People want to live in a village, but they don't want to talk to their neighbors. And that is to say that the actual acts of accountability and building a community are beneath us or too much work, or we don't think of it, or it's too awkward. So something you could do is ask someone about themselves. Why is this something that you might do? Well, asking someone about themselves has a number of benefits. It can keep a conversation going. It can be a form of small talk. And by small talk, I mean the sort of surface level, low risk conversation we engage in order to pass time, or initiate a relationship, or transition into deeper discussion. We don't go up to people and just say, hey, tell me your deepest, darkest fear. Or we don't walk up to someone and say, hey, let's be friends. Tell me about your entire childhood. That's weird. We need more context and information and building kind of common ground with people and sussing them out and figuring out what someone's values are or whether there's someone we might want to share more information with. And so that's why we start conversations by talking about the weather, right? It's something that we all have in common. We all experience weather. So asking someone about themselves can be part of that surface level conversation that helps us get to understand someone and figure out how we would like to relate to them. Asking someone about themselves can also just signal our interest in someone else. We're literally telling them that we're interested in them and how they're doing. Sometimes the information provided doesn't even really matter because just asking them about themselves is literal information to them that we want to know about them. And then it does open up an opportunity to learn something about the other person. They'll usually volunteer information in response to the question, right? We ask them how they're doing, and they'll sometimes tell us how they're doing. And that information tells us about them. There's the literal answer, right? We might learn about their family or their hobbies or their mood or how they spent their day. And then there's the meta information, like whether they offer up intimate and personal information right away, or how comfortable they seem to be talking about themselves, or whether or not they ask about you in return. I also think asking people about themselves is just a really nice practice for structuring conversations. It allows us to build empathy, and it makes space for other people. It can be really easy to get caught up in our own stuff or feel like we're not supposed to be taking an active role in a conversation or feeling like we're dominating a conversation. And so this thing you can do can help us decenter ourselves. If you feel like you've been talking too much, you can just ask the other person a follow-up question about how they feel or relate to the thing that you're talking about. for me, I'm coming at this both as a human and as a developmental psychologist. I just can't turn that off. I have years of professional training in the area of listening to people and learning about people. So sometimes I forget that not everybody has done that. And it's something I want to explore and share because I've found these skills to be so useful and meaningful in my own life. Instead of going step by step, like step one, step two, step three, I'm going to talk a little bit more openly about steps involved and how you can go about asking someone about themselves, because I think there's a lot of context and stuff that can be really useful for deciding how you want to go about this. But it does help if you've already engaged in a conversation with someone. Maybe you're at a work dinner and everybody's already just talking to each other, or maybe you struck up a conversation with the person next to you at a baseball game, like, they bumped into you and they're like, oh, sorry. And you're like, no, it's totally fine. And they're like, oh, do you come to these games a lot? And you're like, this is actually my first one. And wow, look, you're in a conversation. So this also depends on your comfort level or the situation or relationship. But one place that you can start is with something like, how have you been doing? Like, just go for the broad, general question. Now, a word of caution about this is that in the United States, culturally, questions like, how are you, function more as a greeting than as an actual inquiry. So it's common to respond by saying, I'm good, even if you're not good, because it's just, how are you? I'm good. How are things? They're fine. That's just sort of, again, like part of this kind of cultural script. If you want people to answer genuinely, I like to kind of shake it up a little bit with, how have you been doing? Or how are things going? What's new? That's a good way to help people sort of get out of that, like, oh, I'm fine, it's good, whatever. You can also start with something that you know about the other person but want to learn more about. So, for example, your coworker might mention off the cuff that they were out really late last night and they're really tired. You might respond by saying, oh, is everything okay? Or was it something fun? I like to, again, try to be judgment and assumption free. And an example of this was one time I had somebody message me and say, hey, hope that you're enjoying your time off. I was out of the office dealing with a death in the family, and I was not enjoying my time off. So being open and sort of trying to keep assumptions out of our questions to people can be really useful. So saying, is everything okay, or was it something fun? That allows people to share whatever they want and not feel like there's an assumption being made. So they could say, like, oh yeah, no, I was just at the Lady Gaga concert. We've been looking forward to it for months and it was really awesome. And then now you've learned something about this person. They like Lady Gaga and they go to concerts on a weeknight. Or maybe they respond, ugh, we had to take my toddler to the emergency room because she stuck crayons up her nose again. And then you can respond by saying, oh my gosh, I hope she's okay. I didn't even know you had kids. Like, that sounds exhausting. Is there anything I can do to help? And so just by asking someone like, oh, you okay? Because they said that they were out late last night. You have a new bond with this person. You learned something new about them. I also like to ask people direct questions to learn more about them based on the flow of conversation. So for example, I was at a dinner with a bunch of people. We were talking about restaurants and food and cooking. And I asked, oh, do you like to cook? What kinds of things do you like cooking? And then people shared a lot about not only whether or not they liked to cook, some people did, some people didn't, but also why, and how this connected to their family background or their living situation or their other hobbies, their other skills, right? Like this is like, oh, I grew up, my mom was always cooking foods that she learned from her grandmother and she taught it to me. And so that was something that I always really cared about. Or, I used to like cooking, but I live in such a tiny cramped apartment now, like it's just not worth it. Or my partner does all the cooking and I'm really happy with that, right? Like you're learning so much about people and they're able to share things that they wouldn't otherwise maybe have an opportunity to share with you. It wasn't a terribly personal question, and it wasn't out of left field. It wasn't like I was going down a list of icebreakers and saying, do you like to cook, right? Instead, it kind of created space for people to share aspects of themselves that wouldn't have come up if we were just kind of following this very surface level flow of conversation without asking about each other. Now, some people don't love this kind of approach. I personally am notorious for veering into icebreaker territory, and some people really don't like, kind of going around the table and asking about whatever. If that's not your vibe, that's totally fine, but there's so many other ways that you can ask people about themselves based on your own style and preferences. And this is where I also come back to the weather. And here is how and why, in my opinion, the weather is a wonderful topic of conversation. Let's say you're talking about the weather, it comes up that there's a big snowstorm coming. You can literally ask someone, "Oh, do you like snow? Are you looking forward to this?" And because people are going to share so much about how they feel. I mean, they might just say, "No, I don't love snow," or "Yeah, snow's fine," or "I never thought about it." But I also find that sometimes people are going to go really deep about things that you never expected. Like, I love snow. I grew up in Minnesota, and it was always the best time of the year when the first snow fell, and I would go out shoveling with my parents and we would have hot chocolate. And you're getting so much information about this person and sentimental memories just by asking them about snow. Or on the other hand, somebody might say, "You know what? I only just saw snow for the first time last year and I'm very overwhelmed by it." That's another place that you can connect with someone and learn something about them. Like, when it feels appropriate to go a little deeper, you could ask, "Did you grow up somewhere with snow?" The weather is so personal because it's related to where we live and how we grew up, and it affects so much of our lives. I'm somebody that gets weather related migraines. So when the weather changes, I really feel that. There are people that their joints are affected by the weather and the rain, and there's just so much that the weather affects that can make space for people to share that information and to better understand how someone is doing. Now, there are also ways to ask follow-up questions that center the other person, and that's a really great way to ask people about themselves. So, getting beyond the weather, for example, at work, if there's a really tight deadline, you could say, "I noticed you do so great with these tight turnarounds. Do you tend to work better under pressure?" And they might just say, "Yeah, I do," and then move on. Or they might say, "No, it's just annoying," and move on. But it's also possible that they will give you a really funny anecdote about pulling all-nighters in college. Or they might tell you about how at their last job, they actually saved the company by fixing a presentation 2 hours before the client landed. And it was like a whole big thing and a major turning point in their own career. So now you can understand this person so differently because you ask them about themselves and not just about the work that they're doing. And that's not to mention more relaxed social situations where we're actually trying to learn about other people to build the foundation of a friendship. I think it's really important to be sensitive to the diversity of human experience. So I'll talk a little bit about how to be aware of sensitive topics, right? There's some personal topics that can be really sensitive for a variety of reasons. For example, where you live or where you grew up can be a proxy for social class in some places, or could be received as a microaggression about whether someone really belongs somewhere. When I was in graduate school in Boston, it was a really common sort of icebreaker, small talk thing about "Oh, where do you live? Where are you commuting from?" But it made me really uncomfortable sometimes because if you've spent time in Boston, you might know that it's pretty segregated and redlined, and communities are pretty separated based on social class, and that's not to say that you can definitely tell about somebody and how much money they have based on where they grew up or where they live. But if someone says that they live in Newton, that probably is telling you something about whether they have a bunch of money, because Newton is a pretty affluent area, right? And for me, I was commuting from my parents' house. So being "Yeah, I commute from my parents' house" was, asking me to share something about myself that maybe I didn't want to. So just being aware of that, and what you might really be asking someone. Family and growing up can be really sensitive for people who experience trauma, abuse, or loss. But that's not to say never ask people about things, because that doesn't make any sense. Just be thoughtful. Just be aware of what assumptions you might accidentally be including in your question, right? If you ask someone about their mom, well, their mom might be dead, so that would be a bummer, or maybe they grew up with two dads or whatever. So trying to just be a little bit open, a little bit inclusive can avoid some of those awkward moments. I'll sometimes ask, like, what do you do with your time? Instead of what do you do for work or do you work? Because not everybody works and some people are really sensitive to that. I also just think it's so much more interesting to let people consider how they spend their time and answer that question however they want. Like some people will get weird. I'll be like, "Oh, like how do you spend your time?" And some people will be like, "What do you mean? Do you mean like work?" And that's fine and whatever. But some people will be like, "Yeah, how do I spend my time?" Well, I have a day job doing this, but I actually really love spending time with my kids. And I think that's lovely and tells me so much more about somebody. Again, in that snow example, that can be a place to ask, like, oh, did you grow up somewhere with snow? Because someone could say, no, actually, I really didn't. Or they could say, no, I grew up in Mexico and I never saw a single snowflake until I came to Boston for college. So again, like, there's just so many opportunities to learn more and to let people offer up information that they might not otherwise have space to share about. Another tip is just to follow someone's lead and try to notice the direction of conversation to make sure that it doesn't come off that you're trying to probe for information. So, asking a lot of really specific, pointed questions to someone can make it feel like you're just trying to get information out of them rather than trying to just get to know them in a more kind of friendly way. So you might be talking about food and then you're asking a bunch of questions like, oh, do you cook a lot? Oh, do you eat a lot of takeout? And that could come off as like you're judging them for not cooking enough or trying to figure out how much disposable income they have. Like, oh, what kind of takeout do you get? Like, again, this isn't to make you feel like super self-conscious about all the questions you're asking, but just to be aware of. When in doubt, just follow someone else's lead for what information they're volunteering and what topics of conversation feel appropriate. And using questions as a way to like find common ground with someone or let them bring in more of themselves to the conversation versus being on a fact-finding expedition. So I also wanted to offer some rapid fire prompts, just out of context. Well, I guess I'm giving a little bit of context, but just questions that you can add to your repertoire because sometimes we just need inspiration, and I totally get that. So let's say you're at a restaurant, you could ask, how did you find this place? What's your favorite thing to order here? What's your go-to place in the city? Or what's your go-to place when you need a pizza? How far are you usually willing to go for a good restaurant? That can be a nice way to start a conversation like, oh, I'll go anywhere for the right food, or if I have to get on the subway, I'm not going. I guess these are very New York City centric questions, but you can adapt them. Let's say you're at a mixer or a social event. Some prompts include, what brought you here to this event? How long have you been coming to this event? What do you do for work? Or how do you spend your time? Or do you work? Do you usually enjoy big events like this? What types of mixers do you like to go to? How do you usually do your networking? If you're at a family event, you could ask, what's been new with you? How is, insert pet, family member, friend, here? What's new with, insert hobby, here? Do you have anything exciting coming up? Then there's some generic questions about interests that I think can be really lovely small talk and a nice way to ask someone about themselves. Are there any TV shows that you've been really into? Are you a big reader? What's on your list these days? Are you a big outdoors person? Where do you like to go? What do you like to do there? Do you play video games? What's your favorite? Or what are you playing right now? Do you follow any sports teams? How did you get into them? Are you a fan of insert current weather situation here? So some final thoughts based on all of this. Like these are just a lot of suggestions and ideas that will depend entirely upon the situation and you and your comfort level. It is good practice for these to be part of a broader conversation. So, offering up a little bit about yourself without pulling focus. For example, you might be talking about TV shows and you might say, like, oh, are you watching any really good TV shows? And they say, yeah, I've been watching The Real Housewives. And you say, oh, you know what? Like, I used to watch The Real Housewives of New York back in the day. And now you're having a conversation with each other. You might say, I've been so into Secret Lives of Mormon Wives recently. Like, are you watching any shows these days? Do you binge shows a lot? These are, again, opening, like ways to open up conversation versus just like fact-finding missions. Or you might say, oh man, this heat wave is really getting to me. I melt when it's over 80 degrees. Like, what about you? Do you tolerate the heat well? So see, these are ways to kind of like keep things going back and forth, trying to keep the sharing even on both sides. It can be really tempting to respond to a share with a share, but you want to be aware that this can pull focus back onto yourself. So again, if somebody says like, oh, I really love The Sopranos, you can say, I also love The Sopranos, but maybe then ask them a follow-up question like, who's your favorite character? Instead of just going on your own tirade about The Sopranos and how it tells us so much about the early 2000s in the United States and the death of the American nuclear family, etc., right? Like, that's now making it about you again. So how can you kind of keep things going? Sometimes you can share your thing and then volley it back with another follow-up, and sometimes you just have to hold on to your fun tidbit for another time. So use your own judgment. Practice with a trusted friend. This can be useful. Like, you don't have to say like, hey, I'm going to practice small talk with you. Although sometimes that is useful. You might just like the next time you see your roommate making dinner in the kitchen, just ask them what they're making. Ask them if it's the first time they've made it, right? You're learning something about them and their cooking that might tell you something new, even though you've been watching this person make dinner for the last 2 years that you've been living together. Or you could just try tossing out a question in the next social situation you're in and see how it goes. It's nice to learn about people. It's nice to make space for people and to show that we care about them. And we're never going to be able to build that village that we want where everybody takes care of each other if we don't get to know each other beyond just the meat of the things that we're talking about, like at work or at a PTA meeting or whatever. Like, it helps to get to know people. And asking someone about themselves is something you can do to get to know people. This has been Something You Can Do with me, KJ Kozak. As always, this is something you can do, not things you have to do or should do or even will be able to do. Some things just won't work for people based on their geographic location, ability, or other factors, and that's okay. The point is to be interesting, and if you found it interesting, please like, share, subscribe, leave a 5-star review. If you didn't find it interesting, I don't know, you can let me know that too. I do take constructive criticism. You can find us on Instagram at somethingyoucandopod or send me an email to sycdpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks a bunch. See you next time.